session, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be chaired by Shri A.K. Verma, former Joint Secretary, Ministry of Power, and moderated by Dr. Rahul Tongias. So let me take the privilege of now very quickly and very briefly introducing our chair, our moderator, and our esteemed speakers. Now, Shri Arun Kumar Verma, the former Joint Secretary, Ministry of Power, Govt of India, looked after the distribution reforms and schemes like DDUG-JY, IPTS, Uday, National Smart Grid Mission, including REC and PFC in the country. And before this, he was looking after hydro and related matters as well. And he has specialization in distribution reforms in power sector, energy management, rehabilitation of stressed projects, grid modernization, to name a few. And under his stewardship as managing director during 2008 to 11, the Uttar Gujarat Wijj Company Limited, UGVCL, a government-owned power distribution company, has won the first prize at IEE MA Power Award 2009, India Power Awards 2009 and 10, several awards there. Let's welcome Shri A.K. Verma with a huge round of applause. Let me now go on to, again, very briefly touch upon Dr. Rahul Tongias' introduction. He's been introduced before the previous session as a speaker. He's a senior fellow with CSEP in New Delhi, where his work focuses on technology and policy, especially for sustainable development. And ladies and gentlemen, he leads the Energy, Natural Resources and Sustainability group at CSEP and is also active in broader issues of technology. Once again, a warm welcome to you, Dr. Tongias.
Madam, can you start my video? I'm A.K. Verma. Can you start my video? My video has been stopped at your end.
Yes, sir. We will. Let me just introduce all the speakers, sir. Then we will start your video. Definitely. Do we have the video ready for Shri A.K. Verma?
His camera.
Your camera, sir. You'll have to just go on to your own.
No, it has been switched off by you, not by me.
Okay. All right, sir. I'll just figure that out. We'll have to get the camera started for Shri A.K. Verma. And
yeah, thank you. Now it seems like that.
Welcome, sir. Let me now move on to introducing our panelists. We have Mr. Sanjay Kumar Banga, the current president of Tata Power Delhi Distribution Limited, a power sector veteran with 27 years of experience in power generation and distribution, and he's been with TPDDL since July 2003, brings with him extensive learning in generation and distribution operations. Let's welcome him with a huge round of applause. Let me now go on to introducing Shri Shalabh Srivastava, Country Director, RTI India. He brings 2 decades of management consulting experience to his current role, wherein he leads RTI International India's verticals in energy, environment, and cities. He focuses on penetrating new markets in the Indian subcontinent in the sectors of power, renewables, clean hydrocarbon fuels, air quality, and smart cities. Let's welcome him with a huge round of applause. Welcome, Srivastava. And let me invite now Mr. Marcelo Castillo. Since 2014, he was in charge of origination, scouting, and screening of distribution and transmission business opportunities worldwide, both for new market entry and growth, as well as of M&A deal execution and management. And in almost 30 years within the NL group in Italy, working in Latin America, Spain, and Italy, he's built a strong and multifunctional background, being responsible for coordinating strong and multifunctional teams. Let's welcome him with a huge round of applause. With that, let me introduce our next speaker. Shri Anurag Jordi, the Senior Principal Utilities, Accenture India. He is Senior Principal with Accenture India with more than 16 years of experience in strategy development, operations improvement, sales and marketing transformation, and program management. He's worked with private and public companies in 6 countries, including India, Indonesia, the United Kingdom, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Ethiopia. Let's welcome him with a huge round of applause. Welcome, Mr. Jordi. Let me now invite our final speaker, Shri Jitendra Nalwaya, Vice President, BSES Yamuna Power Limited. He has a professional experience of more than 25 years in various organizations across India, mainly in power sector. He's an electrical and electronics engineer from Manipal with an added qualification of general management from Indian Institute of Management, Lucknow. And he presently is handling sustainability and clean technology, vertical and power distribution utility. Let's welcome him with a huge round of applause, Shri Jitendra Nalwaya, Vice President, BSES Yamuna Power Limited. With that, I'm now going to hand over the proceedings to Dr. Tongia to kindly take over as our moderator. Dr. Tongia, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, and welcome to all our panelists, distinguished panelists. It's been very interesting, but now some people may think it's a long day and would have wished for a break, but we charged through. And the topic at hand is really on privatization or privatization roadmap for the utilities. And it's a very interesting topic because it's not exactly clear to a lot of end users what this means. And part of this stems from this concern of what is the role of electricity? Is it a commodity or is it a public good? A lot of people get concerned about that. And the reality is somewhere in between. It should be viewed as not as a public good, but as a public utility. And a public utility has specific roles. In the previous session on regulation, we heard that there is an obligation to serve. That is one of the key tenets of being a public regulated utility. So we'll come back to this aspect very shortly. Before I share a few quick thoughts that will get the juices flowing with some questions, I want to first turn over. So the flow is going to be that there will be brief opening remarks, a few minutes by all of us, but then let's have a panel discussion instead of focusing on presentations to the extent possible. There are 3 sets of questions. Basically, what do we want out of it? How do we do it? And then what don't we know and what steps can we take? So I have a list of these questions that will be shared. I'm not sure if the organizers were able to send these in advance to all the panelists, but that's okay. And but first, I would like to just turn to our chair, who has looked at DISCOMs in his professional capacity. In the large list of focus areas that Dr. Verma had worked on, it was not mentioned that he was extensively behind setting up the Saubhagya scheme, which has been a game changer from the Indian perspective. Household level electrification in specifically. So Dr. Verma brings a wide gamut of participation. If I could request you, Dr. Verma, to share a few brief opening remarks to set the tone.
Thank you, Rahul. Good afternoon to everybody. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So I wish good afternoon to everybody who is on line and participating in this distribution utility meet 2020. Let me take this opportunity to extend my thanks, extend my appreciation, extend my solution to the entire power functionary group of India, you can say, because the pandemic requires more the power than the medicine. Because all care, all health care, your living, your transportation, your systems cannot work unless there is power. And fortunately, during this entire pandemic period, throughout the country, whatever reports we are getting, by and large, the power supply position has been quite satisfactory. And this is very, very satisfying thing. So my first and foremost comment is to extend my appreciation and laurels to the power functionary, power practitioner, power professional of this country who are managing it. 2-3 things, I mean, during this pandemic period also, say the distribution utility have been the focus of the discussion in the power sector, primarily because of 2 things. One is the increasing bills of the GENCO, pending unpaid bills of the GENCO. And the second was about the privatization, because the utilities financial health is not in good shape. Their debt is increasing, and that most likely increasing debt means their service quality would be affected adversely, and therefore there is some kind of say worriedness about the future of the distribution sector. And then privatization is being thought as an instrument to bring the efficiency. Fine, I mean, this is the background. In this background, 2-3 things that the SBD, that the Ministry of Power has already issued, and the debates that is going on, the response of the states that are coming up, we must look into 2-3 issues. And as Dr. Tongias has already given in the initial remark, that he will have a set of questions, and if we go on discussing the question as a panel, on the panel, we will be answering more, we will be answering the things in an elaborate way. But few points are very, very important. One is that privatization just as a ownership transfer has no meaning. Privatization must be done to bring efficiency. And we have mixed experience in our country. Whatever be the reasoning, there are states where the government-owned utilities are doing well. Of course, it is not a business of profit making for them, those states. But they are sustaining. They are sustainable economic venture. And similarly, there are examples in our country where the totally privatized utility have failed. There are examples in our country where the privatized utility, where the majority is the private sector's share, like Delhi, they are doing quite well. So we have mixed experience, and this is because not of the I will not say about the managerial efficiency or disefficiency, but the reason is the structural problems. Now 2, 3, 4 structural problem. One is the PPAs. The power purchase cost is increasing. The other is the employees' responsibility. I mean, many times in a government utility, the employees work as if it is somebody else's work. I am being paid for X amount of time and I'm just spend that time and gone. I do not have any commitment and responsibility towards the service of the customer, towards the well-being of the utility. So these are the differences. These are the structural issues. The subsidy, the cross subsidy. I mean, this cannot be transferred or this cannot be removed unless we address the structural issue. Cross subsidy in our country, you cannot remove unless you say create some pressure on the domestic finance or the family finance of the smaller consumers. Now government can chip in, be it the central government or be it the state government, they can chip in through the DBT and reduce their financial burden. Fine. The PPA, say we had been a power scarce country, and therefore lot of generation have happened. Now there is a surplus. They are paying for the idle capacity, and those payments are quite heavy and almost on average 15% of the total cost, fixed cost, and that ranges between 10% to 30% for different utility. The another point is about the structure is about the tariff. In a state having multi-utility, tariff of different government-owned utilities are not different, whereas the tariff of a private utility is different and tariff of a government utility is different. But all government utilities have the same tariff, despite the fact that one is doing much better, the other is not doing better. So there are many structural issues that needs to be addressed before we privatize. About PPA, the surplus power, how it will go, the asset transfer. I think many of the commentators have already written in very popular articles recently saying that transfer of asset is going to be a difficult task, because what will happen to the, say, already accumulated losses? What will happen to the, say, arrears? What will happen to the structural deficiency in the regulatory mechanism? Something like truing up. Truing up, to my mind, is something which is completely failure in our country. Because if you true up something after a certain time and ask the utility to realize the arrears from the consumer, it becomes difficult in many of the areas. What will happen to the concessional supply to the poor people, to the agriculture consumers? Because in a democratic polity, if there is a political economy of the electricity, then one has to accept and design the structure accordingly so that the operation of the utility is not affected by that. You simply saying that the utility should run on the business principle, whether country has created a design for that? No. We are still having utility, government or utility, not only as a commercial entity, but as a service provider for the poor people also. So these are some of the aspects that should be addressed if we go on privatizing. The second part is very important from the other side. The appetite among the private players. If there are not enough number of private players, the competition would be reduced. And then again, crony capitalism and crony business groups will develop. So a government monopolistic government or monopolistic government owned utility or monopolistic private or not monopolistic, then oligarchy of the private players will also not be helpful for the consumer. So these are some of the aspects we must think before that. With this opening remark, I'll request the moderator that initially all the panel members are giving their opening remark, and then we can go through the questions. So then probably we would be in a much better position to crystallize our thoughts and to come to a conclusion which can help the distribution utilities to be either to be privatized or to be reformed or to be serving better to their consumers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Verma. So if you could turn on my slides, and while that's happening, I'll just observe your points raised match a lot of our questions. Today's Hindustan Times, I believe, has an article on banks, privatization, public and private. And the answer they say is it's really about the governance. It's about the incentives. And in some ways, public versus private could become a red herring. And then you have the issues that Dr. Verma really pointed out. What are you setting them up to do? How is the structure set up? If you could just turn on the slides, please. Meanwhile, I just
have to share the screen, no?
No, they have them with me. Otherwise, I can share mine as well. If
you have with you, but it should come on the screen, no? That's more important.
Well, they were running it, but let me share mine if that...
you have to share the screen, then it will come to us. And
sure.
to everybody who is online. Yeah, yes. Now it is there.
You're able to see the screen?
Yes, yes, yes.
So, and hopefully you're seeing the full screen?
Yes, full screen.
Thank you. So, I'm reminded of a statement. Inder Malhotra, the late journalist, he was giving a guest lecture for me in a class I was doing a few decades ago. And he said this phrase that stuck with me. India needs to do a better job of striking the balance between Saint Mark's and Saint Market. And it's this balancing act portion that I think is key, because each of these has pros and cons. And the key takeaway for this privatization discussion is privatization doesn't equal competition. Just because you're private doesn't mean you've achieved a market status, because what a market needs is liquidity and competition. That's the first sort of observation. The second observation is private or public, both have worked. Dr. Verma talked about some Indian examples. You look at franchisees. Now, that's not full-fledged distribution privatization, but it's like a mini or pseudo privatization in an area. Some private sector franchisees have failed. Some have done much better. In other countries, you have public and private, both models working well. Singapore is an example of public utilities. Many East Asian are public. Parts of Europe are public. Marcelo can maybe share some more from his global experiences. But even in the United States, some 15% of the population, 30% of the surface area is covered by rural cooperatives, what they call co-ops and municipalities ones. You've got then investor-owned utilities, which is a little under a half, which is private, you can think of them. And then you've got the balance as government departments. So this is like we have departmental city level, for example, sometimes, or national, like DVC equivalent. You've got Tennessee Valley Authority or Bonneville Power Association. So all of these can work. What you really need is a good regulator setting the norms for them, and then they all behave along the incentives that are given to them. The three realities, Dr. Verma, in fact, alluded to this. One is DISCOMs are just part of the chain. A lot of your cost is in procurement, a majority, around 3/4. And how you handle cost structures and contracts, PPAs is key. In theory, again, just saying in theory, not in practice, public or private shouldn't matter, assuming we've got good regulation and incentives. And what we don't have a good enough handle on is, what does success mean? What is a good DISCOM? At a workshop I ran some years ago, in a discussion, someone asked, what is the KPI of a DISCOM MD, a public DISCOM MD? And people said, oh, it's to cut down AT&C losses. It's to improve supply position, load shedding, or profitability, consumer happiness, staff happiness. And then he said, you know what? The KPI of a DISCOM MD is to not get transferred the next day. And so that really speaks of the heart of this issue of what is there a fundamental difference between a public and a private utility? And then can the facets be blended together? So the list of 3 questions that I have, and hopefully these slides can just stay on the screen, is first, what are the objectives? So if privatization solves the problem, what does that mean? What is the question? Is it capital? Is it efficiency? Is it best practices? Is it freedom from political pressures? What are we expecting out of them? Second, what are the KPIs and what are the realistic timeframes? Because if we ask too much, they're going to be failing. And if we make it too easy, then you're going to have this problem where people say you're socializing the losses and privatizing the profits. Second area, you've got alternatives or complementary issues of franchisees, retail competition. What else is on the table? Right now, privatization has been discussed for a niche within India, which is really the UTs, like Chandigarh and some other areas, Puducherry, some other places have been proposed to be on the anvil. And there is a draft bidding document or draft mechanism that the ministry had also laid out, a model framework, in fact. A fundamental issue is also, are there risks of cherry picking? Because who's going to go? You mentioned this question of appetite, and it's really good that Sanjay is on the panel, because Tata Power has been one of the leaders in extending its services across the country, both as owners as well as franchisees or stakeholders. And then the last series of questions, so we could spend maybe 15-20 minutes on each of these, is what do we not know? What are the gaps and what are the steps we need to take? So this includes alignment of political will. So why will the state government say yes? Why will the employees be happy? Who will want to take over different DISCOMs? Because if we give the same norms and expectations all India, it won't work necessarily, because an urban area is very different from a rural area with a very high AT&C loss or many other structural problems, legacy, contracting, etc. Is it possible to do piloting? Can we learn from other countries? Marcelo, maybe you can especially share some insights, because this is a transformation. It's not, in many countries, you always had private. It's very distinct. So in Mumbai, Kolkata, and a few parts of India, you had pre-independence, private sector DISCOMs which continued. In most other cases, they were nationalized after the 48 Act, and then they were subsumed. They lost their concession to actually provide private sector electricity, and it unfolded into the state electricity boards modeled after the Great Britain's electricity model. And last question is, if we're talking of privatization as one transformation, what does this have to do with other transformations? How can we align them? Can we have secondary mandates such as smart meters or technology adoption or competitiveness and so forth? So these are the questions that are there. And I'd like to maybe throw it open and start with Shalabh. If you could just share your brief opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Rahul. Am I audible?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank God you didn't say it depends. Okay. So your questions are pretty apt to start the discussion, Rahul. Especially the first one, if privatization is the answer, what is the question? And then, of course, related to that, the when, how, by when, and why not, etc. So I think privatization of DISCOMs, now that it's a topic that we can't wish away, it's been around for some time. And even if it's a mixed bag, as Dr. Verma said, the fact is mixed bag has successes. And you can't ignore them. You need to emulate some of it, which is right. My answer would be the objectives of privatization could be divided into measurable outcomes like loss reduction, which was the holy grail of REP, DRP, and then blended into UDAY. The ACS ARR gap reduction, which was also a second objective of UDAY. Then the quality of power, SIDs, FE, etc. And then 100% electrification at household level, which was the objective of Saubhagya. So these are some examples of measurable outcomes. Then measurable inputs like capital infusion. If most of the state governments are insolvent or most of the DISCOMs are tending towards bankruptcy and massive capital infusion is required to turn them around in coming years, how will government alone under the FRBM constraints or even otherwise in terms of fiscal prudence be able to put that kind of capital? And is it not a good market practice to involve private sector wherever there is a heavy capital intensive investment oriented turnaround needed? But the third and most important objective, according to me, are qualitative strategic improvements. You can call them institutional reforms if you want to borrow the analogy from other sectors of the economy like ease of doing business and infrastructure and transport and so on. Energy sector also needs its share of institutional reforms, especially DISCOMs. It needs improvements in governance. It needs improvements in organizational setups and HR practices. The most important aspect of a DISCOM is its people. Most of the time when privatization has happened, like in Delhi, for example, the people of erstwhile Delhi Budget Board were just absorbed, inducted, but a small dose of external private sector people were also introduced, and the overall mix delivered in 10 to 15 years what they couldn't in the preceding 60, 70 years. And so people, both customer side, but more importantly, the employees and the outsourced manpower of DISCOMs are also at the heart of any such turnaround. And unless they are brought into the fold and energized and trained and motivated to contribute and perform and rewarded for that, no reforms will last. And I think one of the objectives of privatization should be that kind of an intrinsic, organic institutional reforms as well. You talked about timelines for KPIs. What are realistic time frames for new entrants? My guess is it's not a matter of years. It's a decadal problem. You should have at least 1 to 1.5 decade time frames to review. You can monitor constantly, but in terms of having a realistic time frame, it should be in the range of 10 to 15 years. Most of the time, the licensing agreements are in excess of that, 20 to 25 years. So I think we're good on that front. But in terms of chronology, I think the internal organizational reform should be put first. Any kind of external, process improvement, technology improvement, digitalization, etc., will work only if and when and after the internal people have been trained and empowered to absorb those advancements. So time frame is one thing, but chronology within that time frame is equally important. And in my own set of priorities, organizational reforms and people employee engagement and empowerment would be one of the first turnaround points for a typical state DISCOM I'm talking about. Third, you said, what about the optics of socializing losses and privatizing profits? I would want to link your question with the other questions around risk of cherry picking. That's what happens if you allow cherry picking. A byproduct of that would be that profits will get privatized and losses will remain socialized. And which brings us to the next question: is there enough depth in the market in the private sector for some private sector players to say who would want to take up a problematic DISCOM and what are the incentives for taking it up? I think if all these three questions are linked, and some of the answers we can think of are on the following lines. One is we need to change the mindset. Private sector is in here to earn profits. The very notion that private sector should not earn or earn minimal profits or profits are a necessary evil is wrong. Private sector has to be a win-win partner along with public sector in transforming utilities. And in a way, if they are able to earn profits from an erstwhile loss-making DISCOM, it's a success metric for me. That's the first change of mindset that I would advocate. Second is one way to avoid cherry picking and kind of force or mandate the problematic DISCOMs and the lucrative DISCOMs to be to get the benefit of market-facing privatization initiatives could be to form combo bids of one lucrative and one problematic territory of commensurate size and scale, and force the people to bid only for combos. So if there are combo-based bidding, like something that happened way back in aviation sector, you would not be able to cherry pick in isolation. A simple example could be a district level bidding wherein the urban center is probably a more lucrative, less problematic area, and the surrounding rural and peri-urban areas have their share of problems. You can carve them out as two territories for legal purposes, legal and accounting, but you can enforce that the bidding will happen in combos only. That is one way, one suggestion that I have. And the corollary to that is, why will somebody bid for a problematic DISCOM one answer that I can offer is that instead of going by the standard bid document route, which has its share of, onerous terms and conditions to meet, and rightly so, if it's a standard bid document, it will have to err on the side of being safe and cautious and not giving away freebies to crony capitalists. Fair enough. But what about problematic discoms and action targeted for resolving their issues? One way out could be a Swiss challenge amongst the various mechanisms of procurement of services available to the government, especially complex project-based services. One of the least utilized is Swiss challenge, wherein you can have an incumbent come in, an original proponent come in, study the specific territory under question, give out a solution, give out a sealed envelope solution, and then the utility or the state government can run an open challenge to see if there is someone who can meet or beat that offer. And if not yet, then you do have one qualified bidder who's potentially eligible to take up the challenge for which he has prepared the original proposition. Then you have questions, Rahul, around franchising, retail competition, and licensing as a model of privatization. I personally believe licensing is the best because bulk of your cost is power purchase cost. And as a franchisee, if you're not accountable for it, then you're only accountable for certain operations. So personally, I think all costs, all revenues, all capex, all protex should be the responsibility and accountability of the new management structure that comes into place. And therefore, I don't believe that carving out these functions makes an optimal mix. I think license-based privatization for a 20-year plus period for combos of lucrative and problematic territories is the right way. Now, having said that, I do have one observation, and that is on size, the area of the territories which are put out for bidding. What we have observed is that the territories where turnaround has been successful, whether through privatization or otherwise, have been rather small. They are one city, one district kind of territories, or sometimes even smaller than districts in case of a large city like Delhi, for example. Or even if you take government-owned discoms like Kanpur, which is a separate discom in itself, it has transformed itself in the last 10, 15 years dramatically vis-a-vis rest of Uttar Pradesh, which is like 4 very, very large discoms. Each discom is of the size of a European country. I don't think management control can work at that level. We should have very, relatively speaking, much granular territories for restructuring and turnaround. And these could be district level or sub-district level as well. What would be the opinion of state government? Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say, since there's a lot of questions, why don't we come back to that? If you could just come up with a big picture first, since I didn't mean for everyone to go through all the questions at once, just prioritize a few of them for now.
Sure.
Any other sort of key thoughts as you close your opening remarks?
One question that you asked was about state governments. Why would they be interested, or what's in it for them? I think 2 things, or rather 3 things. One is capital infusion. If they are financially insolvent, why would they not want the benefit of private sector participation to infuse capital under whatever terms and conditions? Second is public support. In the long run, any serious state government would want popular support if they can transform the state of service delivery of electricity, like any other public utility. If they take a very short-term approach, if the MD is going to get transferred the next day, these things will never come up on their agenda. But if they take a more than 5-year view, and we all know 5 years is a magic number. If they take a more than 5-year view, I think they can get and garner and mobilize a lot of public support for reforms in power sector. Delhi has been a case and example. And third is employees themselves. You see, government employees themselves form a power center, an influence group, a vote bank. And if there is positive word of mouth on success story of privatization in one department or one segment of the state government, I think that will give out good messages to all of the segments. State governments have everything to gain if they take a slightly more long-term view and more strategic view of things. Sorry for exceeding time.
No problem. I mean, you were sticking to the script, so that is especially useful. I've been through a lot of points. You raised a lot of important points and also suggestions, because cherry picking and sizing are key. So should you give a UP-sized entity up? I mean, any of the discoms of UP themselves are bigger than many countries in Europe, I think was your observation. So it's important and interesting that we're talking about privatization, and we have no government DISCOM right here on the panel, but we do have Sanjay, who's been with Tata Power Delhi and now Tata Power Distribution, which is pan-India in many ways. And Sanjay, if I could ask for your opening remarks, but also keep in mind what are the lessons that we've learned, because even privatization thus far in India has been done in different modes. Odisha's first avatar was completely different from the second avatar. And then to do it for a UT is easier because it's the central government that will take that call. So what do we need? Any sort of opening remarks, please?
Thanks, Rahul, and thanks to ISGF for having me here. It's a privatized DISCOM is a solution for distribution sector problems. I would say answer is yes or no both. The reason being, if we see Delhi was privatized. The distribution utilities can do what they can do in operation and commercial. They can bring down losses, they can improve reliability. But they need support. They need support from state government in terms of law and order, and they need support from regulator who understand their issues. If we don't have this support available, then just by privatization, if we expect that utility will be transformed or will be start making profit, will not be true. At the same time, it's also important what kind of a structure we are proposing to a private entity when he is coming. It's very obvious when a private sector player comes in, he takes over a company from government. Everyone start expecting sea change in performance from the next day itself. Everyone start expecting now the supply will be 24/7. Everyone start expecting that the consumer convenience will be considered at the top. Now this all needing money. And the moment you start putting money, then the tariff issue starts coming. But the way Delhi was privatized, they took care of all these points. They said that first 5 years you take care of only loss reduction, we will provide you transition support. In Odisha, they made it very clear for the next 10 years, we are giving you tariff trajectory. So if you can reduce, you can earn profit, but if you are not able to reduce, you will earn loss also. So there is gain, there is and there is loss. So they are balancing that way, and then it is up to the investor to take that calculated risk. But if today we have a choice to privatize and not privatize, I'm more than sure immediately countries should go for pan-India privatization. Because what I have seen in 2002 in Delhi and what I have seen in Odisha in 2020, there is no difference in terms of serving to consumer. It's a job of government, it's a job of utility to provide 24/7 supply. And if it doesn't have supply, even in night at 2 o'clock, it's the job of utility to address that. Unfortunately, that is not addressed in most part of India. Now, what is the loss if you privatize? It's a purely mindset. We think that the privatization stands for maximization of profit. And I don't know where from it has come. In generation sector, we become generation plus only when the private sector started playing. In transmission sector, the returns were minimized only because when we went to TBCB route. In distribution sector, actually it is not privatization because your tariff is fixed by regulator, your capex is regulated by regulator, your O&Ms are normative. So where a private sector can make a windfall profit, he is completely driven by a board. And let me give you an example. In Odisha, my chairman of the board is the secretary of the government of Odisha. So where from the privatization word in terms of maximizing profit comes in distribution? And if you don't privatize it, the kind of ecosystem which we have in all distribution utility, I don't think we can reduce losses. I don't think, bearing few examples where people are actually responsible, taking accountability, understanding technologies. Unfortunately, that is not there in most of the utilities. we are giving them one scheme after another scheme, failing repeatedly and not learning from those schemes. This is the scenario. We have seen the case of Uday. We have seen the technology-driven APDRP packages which were implemented failed miserably in most of the state DISCOMs. Saubhagya is the one scheme where I really feel satisfied the way we connected each and every consumer. But the sustainability of this consumption, as the consumption has increased in most of the distribution utilities, more and more customers have been connected, or I would say 100% customers are connected. I think this sector should be immediately privatized. And government is not going to lose anything by that, because they have good governance system in place. But if they don't change regulatory system and provide good regulatory design to this distribution utility after privatization, we are going to have more serious problem as we are observing in some part of country now. So those are my opening remarks, Rahul.
Thank you, Sanjay. Maybe we can come up a bit. Marcelo, if I could request you to share some opening words. NL, of course, is very well known in this space for its pioneering work on smart meters, of course, but also it's a leading global utility with global presence. But maybe you can just share some insights from both Italy or Latin America and other places. And also maybe, I'm just throwing this out there, do you think there's appetite of global players to become, to take over a distribution company in India? It's not just about the money, is my only caveat. Yeah, Marcelo.
Okay, I prepared. Did you hear me well, no, Rahul?
Yes,
no?
loud and clear.
Do you have the presentation that I sent yesterday?
If Shivam or somebody else from ISGF, if you could please display the presentation. Okay. Otherwise, you could take share screen if that's more efficient. Attempt that.
Okay, in that case. I prefer that you present. Okay, we wait for your team that could project my presentation if it's possible. You have a technical team, no? Yes, Rahul.
I hope they are doing it, since I'm unfortunately we're all remote. So when you say our team, it's somewhere far away. But
two things. First of all, let's wait from them a couple of minutes. You need to reset the time. Thank you very much. There was only 4 minutes remaining. Now we have 9 minutes. And the point here is thank you very much for the invitation. As you know, we are a global player in the distribution. Exactly, we have some experience on that. We started 35 years ago in Latin America when was privatized Santiago de Chile in Chile, Buenos Aires, Argentina. Maradona was there in that moment. Obviously, and in Lima in Peru, Bogota in Colombia, Rio de Janeiro, and in the case of Brazil. Then 35 years ago, they start. 35. We bought, as a group, all the operations in the capitals. So we participate in all the privatization that moment, 35 years ago, 30 years ago, 25, and we reduce immediately all the cost and the performance on the losses. That is one of the graphs that I want to show, if your colleagues could project it. What we have, in more or less, in average, in all these capitals, we have something like 25% of losses, technical and commercial. And in 5 years or 4 years, we reduce to the half. Then the first entrance in the first 5 years to provide 5 countries of privatization, the capitals, we reduce from 25 to 12, for 20 to 10, then 50% of the reduction, 4 years. This is the first issue that you need to know. And it was impossible to do without the privatization, because people there do not act as a private incentive until we arrive as a private company. So this is the first item that I want to share with you. The second issue is about Spain and Italy. We have in operation 30 million customers in Latin America. We have 45 million customers between Italy and Spain. We are the first operators in the two markets. And 20 years ago, we started the digitalization of the network. Perfect. Thank you very much. We are arriving. Next, please. It's important to show next. To show two things. We have 74 million customers in the worldwide. We produce in the last 20 years 85 million smart metering. Then we have some experience. 45 6 are now operating. More or less 100 gigawatt installed at the half of revenues. 2 million kilometers of network lines. This is more or less 6 times to go. You can go to the moon and to return. This is 2 million kilometers. and the 18 billion of EBITDA. And it's still with the COVID, we are still in 18 billion euros of EBITDA at the end of the year. Next, please. As we are discussing, in the 30 years ago, we start to privatize all the countries of Latin America, no? Colombia, Peru, Chile, Argentina, and Brazil. Now we have there more than 30 million customers. Then the losses from 100% to 50%. In that case, 25 minus 50%. The case of Spain and Italy, I'm going to show in the next slide, please. Next. I'm going to show some difference between the regulation in Latin America, that we have 0.8 billion people, India 1.3 billion, Europe 0.7. No, all the concession in these markets comparing to India are more or less the same. So 30 years of concession, 25 regulatory periods between 3 and 5 years, and when the regulator capture the efficiency and reset what they are doing. And since the investment remuneration always is the regulatory WACC multiplied by the RAB, that is the regulatory asset base, is more or less the same. But the regulation, this is very important, in Europe compared to Latin and India are 2 times the WACC. In Europe, you have more or less 5, and in India, maybe you have 10, the same in Latin America. Then there's a first answer to your question. Do you think some operators international could be interested? Yes, because the regulated rate in India is more than Europe. Okay, this is first answer. The second, OPEX remuneration. The OPEX remuneration, how you can incentive to the operator to reduce the cost. And this is important because you privatize, you have more quality, less cost, more customer satisfaction, obviously, and obviously in this case, more digitalization technology. But the government needs to incentivize, and that is the profit sharing mechanism. The profit sharing mechanism that in India, we understood that is more or less 50%, 1/3 in the losses, 50% in the cost, is fundamental. If India do not incentive when you privatize, the profit sharing means that if I say $1, half of that to the tariff and half of that to the obviously to the operator, that will be very fast the translation of the efficiency in the network. Let's go to the number 6. This is our experience in the track record in Enel. No, year 1987 in Chile, 95 in Rio de Janeiro, Buenos Aires. We did it minus 50% in all the capitals. We have a cut there, and we have a cut there, and people stealing the energy in Rio de Janeiro in the left part of the slide. But it's clear that you can do it with inspection, normalization, armoring. So the main action when you privatize is more inspection, more normalization. You look for the people, collect, go with inspection, and close the fraud. And then armoring. All the networks were open, and we armored the networks in the areas that were more difficult, and they cannot steal the energy in that case. Number 7, please. Okay, important. We produced in the last 20 years 80 million smart metering, 80 million, and we have installed today in operation 45 in our operation, personal operation. You need to install this in India, no doubt. 20 years ago we start. We reduce a lot the cost and improve the quality. I'm going to show now the experience in Spain and Italy. India cannot transform the operation if they do not go through this very low cost device that is the door for everybody. It's the door for the electrical vehicle, it's the door for the renewables, it's the door for intelligence distribution, it's the force for the quality dissemination. You need to put this very, very fast, please. It's my recommendation, humble for your plans. Next. Okay, let's go to the Italy case. The Italy case today, we are working on the self-healing, the real-time control, the sensor in all the networks, all the cybersecurity for sure, because we are a worldwide operator, and the SCADA was discussed with Tata Power is there, no? Let's go to the next, and the number 9, the history of Italy. Number 9, the history of Italy is here. Look for the 2001. The first curve is the outages. The second is the cost of the customers. We reduced the cost 40% in time, more or less in 7 years, and then go to the tendency. And also the tariff of distribution, that is on the right side. You look for the tariff, no? Generation, distribution. Distribution is the red one. Well, we reduce also the tariff. Then more quality, less cost, less tariff on distribution. Perfect. It's perfect. So you can do it. That's the point. Privatization, do that. Smart metering, automation, technology conversion, optimization. There's no doubt that if you are right, less losses, also less cost, less tariff is a welcome process that every country, every continent, every government needs to attract that. No? This is my experience. The final is the Spain case. We did it more fast in Spain. The next, please. We start in the year 2000. That is, you start in the year 2009. We put 12 million digital meters in 5 years, and we reduce also 40% of the cost and improve the quality, something like 40%. We prove it in Latin America. We prove it in Europe. Then I think you can do it as an Indian big country, big continent, and do it with the technology and the best practice worldwide. I'm finalizing the last one. The last privatization we did was in the year 2016 in Brazil. We bought a 3 million customer operation, like the Orisa was saying, but our colleague from Tata, and we reduced the quality, or say improve the quality in more than 20 hours in 5 years. It's very important. So the quality is a matter that you need to maybe explore a little more in India, because you are concentrating more losses. But the quality, when you solve the losses, immediately the society asks to you to do better in the quality. Then you, with the automation, you can do it. Huh? We did it in the last years. Next time, the future. Let's go for the future. I'm arriving to the final. But this is the future. We put here, as you remember, in another conference, the tuk-tuk Ferrari with a photovoltaic. What is coming, our colleagues? What is coming in India? As you know, in the year 2030, all the producers are going to stop the production, the big industry are going to stop the production of the fuel and diesel and gasoline. Then all our networks, all your networks are going to have a strong penetration up to 40–50%, and then the consumption electrical in the city are going to grow a lot. This is the green one. The green one is going to be the electric vehicle effect. In this case, we need to adapt the network for the future. It's not now only the electricity demand, losses, and quality. We need to prepare for the expand and explosion of consumption of the electrical vehicle. I'm sure that you are seeing that in the next 10 years. The resilience, number 13, the resilience is very important to not forget about. We have another 5 component today that is coronavirus, but 2 years ago, we were working with the authority of Europe to incentive the resilience. What if you have wind like this, 300 kilometers per hour? You have a lot of snow, the rain that is coming, the earthquake, now this is coronavirus. We need to prepare our network for resiliency. We need to work with the governments to have a special incentive to have more resiliency, because when they come, you have outage very strong, and we need to be there. For example, the PG&E California company, you know very well, that is a company that more or less $25 billion of operations. They are in bankruptcy because they didn't put the resiliency on the fire. So they think that the lines is okay with the fire, in the case of a fire, and they do not put the resiliency in the automation, and that was very strong, and they today are a very troubled situation. Okay, thank you very much. This was more or less what we are saying. I don't know if I answer your question. I'm trying to be very fast in 10 minutes, and we are open for the questions. Huh? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. We'll come back to you, of course, in the discussion after everyone's opening remarks. But one quick thing that maybe you could just prepare a thought. You don't have to answer it now unless you're willing. You've come to other countries. Are you actively looking at taking over DISCOMs in India? Is the trillion rupee question. So
the question is clear. It's clear. We have the capability. We have the experience. 30 years ago we started, no? And we have a worldwide operation. Then we are analyzing your market in the last 3 years, and really it's an interesting period for you. We are interested to analyze all the opportunities of privatizations that you are working today, and the answer is yes. We as a company are interested to analyze all the privatization opportunities that are going to arise with these criteria, with the criteria that are discussed. Do you have people that are, the losses are high? Do you need quality? Do you need something of let me say efficiency in the cost? We're going to look at that in that sense. The answer is yes, Mr. Rahul.
Thank you. We'll come back to some of the nuances because clearly the macro capability is there and the potential is there, but some of the details are hiding inside the devils. So
the detail is the profit sharing. I answer immediately you. If you had very big opportunities and the government do not share the efficiency, means $1 to less tariff and $1 to the operator, you are not going to reach the efficiency. Understood, no? Why I need to invest? I need to put some technology, or I need to reduce my operation only if there is a profit sharing. Remember the regulatory table, no? The profit sharing, if you have 50% like in Italy, is done. $1 for that, $1 for we, huh? Less tariff, more incentive. This is the only way. Some governments do not do that. Do not do that. Do not do the efficiency. Also give the clawback to the efficiencies. In that case, we are not interested in a worldwide vision. It's a very important role.
Yes, and I believe, for example, the Delhi model was a 50% once you exceed the trajectory. We have with us, thank you, Marcelo. We have with us Mr. Jitendra Nalwaya, who's with BSES, another private utility. And if I could ask you to share very brief opening remarks, Jitendra.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thanks, Rahul. Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you. I think Mr. Verma sir and Sanjay sir has already set the context along with Shalabh and Anurag is also here. The key point here is when we talk about the privatization, it is not only for it is not just the ownership transfer as Verma sir has indicated. This is mainly the creation of efficiency within the utility environment, and we need to understand. I mean, there are business models which have been taken care in last 13, 14, 15 years, and we see the only PPP model which is we got this very good success rate apart from few franchisee models like Agra, and now Rajasthan is also doing good in Ajmer and other CSC areas. But there are some bottlenecks in franchisee model. I mean, when we talk about the efficiency, we talk about the autonomy, authority, and the power purchase cost and other kind of efficiency. But at the end, we have to understand. I mean, the major stakeholder in all those kind of transition when we go into field, they are the customers, employees, their employees, and the other stakeholder. And when the customers and when the consumers comes, automatically the political environment becomes active and hot. And as Sanjay sir has indicated, I mean, when you go into the first day, because I've operated 5 franchisee transition, and I've seen. I mean, on the first day itself, something is look like the God has come and everything will be clear by now, and it will be 24/7 power supply, no problems and no issues. So all this kind of bottlenecks are there, but at the same time now SBD MOP has come up with the SBD, and we see some kind of inertia while dealing with the state privatization of big level. I mean, can we have some kind of low area privatization on to the district level, or maybe some kind of 2 or 3 combining 2 or 3 district? And at the same time, I mean, we need to work on franchisee business models also if we want to go ahead. I mean, like we can have some kind of minimum input, and afterwards the incumbent can purchase power from outside market after 3 years, 5 years, if it is for 20-25 years, so that they can leverage some kind of efficiency within that whole 20 years kind of time frame. That's my initial remarks. Yeah.
Thank you, Jitendra. Anurag, if I could turn to you to share your opening remarks, and then we'll get into some really, hopefully not so heated, but still vigorous discussion.
Sure. Thanks. Actually, this is quite an interesting topic. I'm quite passionate about this. Have had a chance to work both with the public sector policymakers as well as utilities like BSES and CSC. And actually, thankfully, my presentation was actually on the same lines. So what I'll do is I'll quickly, take out few slides so that I am able to kind of bring out the points. Essentially, what I have done is that I have tried to do 2 things. One, obviously, inform the discussion basis my own understanding and experience, having worked very closely with, say, CSC and BSES, but also look at some research which I have done over the years. looking at the research by World Bank, by Accenture, and by a number of other parties to see that what exactly is privatization all about when people are trying to do. So essentially, if you really look at privatization over the past, this is a phenomenon which actually happened over the past 50 years or so. Chile and UK being the first few countries which started with this. Now, essentially, there have been 4 motivations. If you look at across sectors, across countries, that is which have kind of taken people to the privatization route. One is attract fresh private capital. The second is improve financial and operational performance. The third is introduction of competition. And the fourth one is to depoliticize. I don't think I need to explain any of these points, right? But before I come to what should happen in India, and I have very strong views about that, let me just kind of pad it up with some research, right? So when you look at research, what does research say when we look at privatization and what are the key determinants of privatization? Because once we are able to answer what are the key determinants, then maybe we can talk about what should be done in India. Now, what the research over the past 50 years says is that what kind of results you get in privatization, largely they are positive, but they are also informed by the sector you are talking about. So for example, if you look at banking as a sector, you will find that overwhelming majority cases, it has actually yielded significantly positive returns. However, if you look at telecommunications, what you find is that there are countries which have yielded very good results, but at the same time, there are countries in South America, there are countries in Africa, which actually showed a negative return. Forget being at the status quo, right? When we look at utilities, for example, what we have seen is that utilities typically have shown a positive trend, but that trend, the extent of the trend has been quite, it has varied depending upon the country. So if there are countries like Chile, which have done exceedingly well, when you talk about, privatization, and there could be other countries which may not have been able to do as well. So, so one is what kind of firm is being privatized. The second is what is the ownership type, right? So essentially, again, what we see across the board, across sectors, across countries, is that foreign investment, when that is brought in along with privatization, you find better outcomes. And maybe the reason is that not only does foreign capital come in, but also the expertise comes in, right? The third thing, and obviously this can never be overemphasized, is the enabling regulatory framework. And finally, the degree of privatization, right? So what we have seen is that typically full privatization yields better results than partial privatization. Now, why did I go through the rigor of all of this, right? Let's look at the Indian context. If I were to really look at the defining characteristics of Indian privatization, what we see is our focus has largely been on improving financial and operational performance. So as I said, there are 4 key motivations typically, but we have kind of concentrated more on improving financial and operational performance. And as a result, all privatization which you see, you will not be able to even find one single anomaly to this, except maybe now when the UTs are being privatized, that only the DISCOMs, only the areas with high AT&C losses have been privatized till date. We have got negligible, I would have said nil, but yes, in Orissa, there was a partner we worked with previously who was, which was Riverside Utilities, which was not exactly Indian, and therefore there was that foreign participation. Otherwise, there has been zilch participation in terms of the privatization part.
Originally, AES was there in Orissa long back in the first round.
Yes, correct. You're absolutely right, Rahul. And finally, what you look at is most of the privatization has been partial. If I take away Delhi, if you really look at as on today, say Calcutta, you never privatized because it always was private. So if you, or even Mumbai, most of it was private even previously. So Delhi actually is the only full privatization if you really like, or maybe Ahmedabad. But otherwise, most of the places we talk about, and as we are moving forward, we are actually moving more towards partial privatization because DF is actually a partial privatization. So this all flies in the face of what I just told you about the research which has happened, right? I said that privatization is the best If it is full, I said there should be a lot of foreign participation. I also said that there should be 4 motivating factors, not 1, right? So what am I proposing? My proposal is that essentially, rather than having the key focus on improvement in operational efficiencies, my suggestion to the government would be, to the policymakers would be, that we should look at attracting private capital. That should be the reason, raison d'etre, if you like, for us to get privatization. Because according to me, and it has got 2 or 3 key components, right? Why I'm saying that. The reason I say that is simple. One, if you really look at the state governments today, what is happening? States do not kind of support you in privatization. But at the same time, if you look at the same state governments, what do they tom to the world when they talk about private sector? They talk about the extent of investments they've been able to commit. Even the commitment of investments becomes a news. Forget the actual coming of the investment, right? So can we, if we start linking privatization with more investments from the private sector in the DISCOM network, I think that will earn us the goodwill of these state governments. What it will also do is that as you bring in more investment, you actually end up raising the quality of service. What you also do is you end up taking away technical losses, correct? And those technical losses can actually lead to improve they can lead to better economics. It can lead to improvements in your operational efficiencies, etc., etc. So essentially, according to me, the focus on attracting private capital should take precedence over other things when we are talking about privatization. The second thing I want to talk about is attracting ownership from international players, the likes of NL, the likes of EDF, etc. Right? And thirdly, there are multiple glitches in the current regulatory framework which need to be ironed out. So I think if we work on these 3 things, I do have slides which talk about what needs to be done for each one of them, but I will reserve them for the later piece. This is my initial comments. So essentially, I wanted to come out very strongly for a paradigm shift in the way we are looking at privatization. It should not be seen as a means of only AT&C loss reduction, but more as a means to bring in private investment, which ultimately will anyways lead to this consequence, right? So on that note, I give it back to you, Rahul.
Thank you, Anurag. And before I get to some of the more details and back and forth, because there's some not conflicting, but trade-offs in some of the things I've heard. So you've said that foreign helps, but we've had very little foreign, truly speaking. And the counter issue is also the government may enable foreign participation, but it's up to them. Like Marcelo said, are the terms attractive enough, whether it's on revenue share or whatever? So it comes back to this issue of, you may call it a detail or a devil, but what are the terms and what are your objective functions and where? So all 3 of these, like Shalab said, we have to triangulate between several of these. So, I mean, at one level, Odisha has only, I think, 4% agricultural losses, not losses, share in agriculture. It's relatively low compared to much of India. Then you have places like Karnataka or UP or parts of some others where it's much, much higher. And now in fact, 1 month ago, in response to this privatization question, there was been a huge hue and cry by the staff of the UP electricity system. And the UP chairman, Electricity Regulatory Commission, actually issued a series of stunning tweets who said, look, this is the wrong problem we're talking about. The real problem occurs with paying bills on time. And he said that 1 crore people have not paid their bill in X years. And so clearly, that's not anything to do necessarily with public versus private, but larger governance failure in some ways. And then which prompts the question, what would a private utility do any differently than a public utility? Doesn't matter if I put in a smart meter, well, except if I'm disconnecting them. But then which prompts the next question, what's prompting the public utility from disconnecting folks as well? So similarly, smart meters, Marcelo, you highlighted the value proposition of them, but at the same time, Sanjay, you've achieved very good success in Rajasthan without smart meters, that in just 1 year, if I remember correctly, 14 months, if I remember, the AT&C losses fell dramatically. So,
Rahul,
yes,
I'd
Varmaji.
like to, before you hand over it to Sanjay, I have few points to make. I have been listening
Please, sir.
very say enlightening debate here. A few big points let me put in the perspective so that the discussion goes in right direction. First thing, Sanjay made this point that why people think that the private agencies are coming for profit making. So say in India, all the government utilities are being run on at the best for the sustainable model. At the best for the sustainable model means it should have a break even. If it has some surplus, it will reinvest for the capital improvement, infrastructure improvement and things like that, not more than this. So if someone without making efficiency, without doing efficiency, goes for profit making, it is going to increase the cost of supply. One aspect. So my point here is simple, that government does not think that private agency will come here for profit making. Most of the consumer would like privatization if the services are improved and the cost is not increased. I think majority of consumer would like that the services should improve, the supply should be 24/7, our complaints should be attended quickly, the downtime is reduced, the response time is reduced, and of the price. Share with you the IEA report of 2020. Based on the data up to 2018, they have come out that on the PPP basis, the domestic tariff in India is higher than USA, China, Korea, and several number of countries. It's in public domain detail. So you have to think about that. So my sense is that neither public nor the state governments are opposed to privatization. What is opposed? What is being opposed? That privatization, if it is going to disrupt the political economy of electricity, it is opposed. In India, see, we pay to torrent much higher tariff than what we pay to the GUVL and any UGVCL, DGVCL, MGVCL, anybody. That's not the case of what Sanjay is looking after. In Delhi, you pay lesser. I used to sometimes laugh why I am being given this kind of tariff reductions and things like that. That is a political economy, because the state government there were trying to, whether they compensated you adequately or not, I do not know. But if somebody is doing this kind of reduction in the tariff, they are going to compensate for it. So it's a political economy. The consumer, the agriculture consumers, they require, they deserve. It happens globally. It is happening in America, it is happening in Mexico, it is happening everywhere. So consumers, the agriculture consumers need to be supplied at concessional rate. Now that compensation of tariff is done adequately by the government or not, that is a matter which is opposed by the privatization. In fact, as on today, DISCOM is an artificial instrumentality in the entire power system between the government and the consumer. Loss or gain, you are transferring on the balance sheet of the DISCOMs, whereas you are encouraging. You are incurring it by one means or other means. So nobody is opposing. It is the political economy of electricity. If it is policy addresses it, it's fine. If it does not address it, whether it is privatized or it remains in the say government-owned government-owned form, and those utility which has to serve to the larger number of poor people and agriculture consumer will certainly not be in a right position. The second point I'm telling, there was discussion how much you privatize, what bigger, smaller. So here the SBD is very clear. The whole utility is to be privatized. Now utility is not a very natural construct. Utility is again an artificial construct, because the composition of the consumer in any utility is not such that the business can become perfectly positive. It may not be bringing you the break-even. There are many utilities in the country which in the best managed situation will not give you a break-even unless tariff is much higher. Because their composition of consumer is like that. You have a cross-subsidized system where the agricultural consumer is paying less and the industrial consumer is paying high and things like that. So this kind of consumer mix is not available everywhere. That point you have to take into consideration. The third point I would like to bring that, you see the AT&C laws, we have it's a very primitive way of thinking about the DISCOM. 21% of the AT&C laws in 2019-20. Okay. The TND loss is only 15.5%. The rest is the collection efficiency is reduced by some method. Collection efficiency is 100% managerial. It has nothing to do with the other thing. Now, TND loss 15.5%. So at the most you can reduce with the given infrastructure that in your country is having today is not less more than 5%. 5% means reduction of 5% means 20,000 to 25,000 crore that you can save the losses of the in the best position, which is not going to address your problem. Which is not going to address your problem as you today what I am saying, because almost more than this you are paying to the cost of the power idle systems. You have a geopolitical priority. You have a clean energy objectives. You are going for a much bigger target of 450 gigawatt and then 175 gigawatt to 2022. But you are not retiring your older plants. You are not retiring your polluting plants. So there would be a surplus, and surplus in the system means there is a cost to that. Even the costing of the renewable is totally unrealistic, because you go only by the newspaper, newspaper scintillating news that now the tender amount value is just 2 rupees per unit, but the entire transmission of the RE is socialized. So your landing cost of the RE is much higher. Then the intermittence of the RE does not allow you.
I think going down the RE route is its own
No,
panel
I'm
required.
just bringing a point. You give me, I mean, either you chair or leave it. If you do not allow me to tell the things.
No, not
No,
just
but
requesting your focus.
Tongias, I am giving you the right picture of the DISCOMs, which is not an academic picture of how privatization should be done. You must address this thing. So,
Absolutely.
Power purchase cost, unless you retire the old one, unless your base load is not dependent upon thermal, unless you have such kind of storage facility, but on maintaining your RE balance all the time is possible, you are not going to have a very profitable situation. Don't consider, say, Delhi or Torrent as the representative of the DISCOM in this country. The consumer mix is quite different. 60% of the consumption in UGVCL goes to the agriculture, and 50% of revenue comes from the industry. This kind of setting is there. Now, another point you were telling about the MD's priority. I mean, I have a point to tell you here. This change of MD is not that much important as the change of policy. MD does not bring policy in the utilities. Policy is something where the government as a whole brings. If Mr. Modi as a CM of Gujarat brings a policy that I have to supply 24/7 to every consumer and we can go on feeder separation, MD is X or MD is Y, it happens. So even in government utility, of course, if somebody is using the MD, either you tow my line, do not remain professional, do not do not realize the taxes or the tariff and leave it and allow the theft, then it's a different thing. But otherwise, if policy is in place and somebody has to implement, of course, that reasonable if tenure is not there, it will certainly disturb. But if tenure is reasonable, it will work. Another point that I would also bring for discussion is about the franchisee. Licensing is a completely different thing. Franchisee, in case of industrial area, has happened very well. The Toronto experimentation or even Tata experimentation is going on very well. It is going on. But franchisee did not work in some area where the consumer mix is very bad, like go to Bihar. Because franchisee people entered into the system which do not have experience of managing the utility and who did not care for the consumer. The third thing is about the investment which the privatization brings. Say, a large amount of investment has been done in the utilities in terms of RAPDRP or DDU, and the quality of supply has improved. You can't say that these schemes have gone wrong. These schemes may not have achieved 100% target, but they have improved the quality of supply. They have improved the infrastructure in our country. So they have addressed them, but the amount of capital requirement for infrastructure is such high. 3,50,000 crore is required within say 2 to 3 years for giving you 24/7 quality power at least. So these are some of the issues that you have to keep in mind. Privatization in certain area will certainly do much better than what the government utilities are doing. But privatization in every area may not be very effective if you consider these factors into designing the utility or managing the utility. Okay, I'm sorry if I have overshot the timing.
No, not at all. Thank you. And I want to slightly change it. Sanjay ji, if you don't mind 1 minute trying to bring us back together on this.
Absolutely.
Your point about the bottom line is consumers or state doesn't want to see the power rise. And I think that's a very valid one. Marcelo had shown a very interesting thing where, if I understood your graph correctly, the distribution component after privatization improved, but the total tariff still may have gone up because the generation cost has gone up. Did I understand your graph correctly, Marcelo?
Very correctly. That was the typical, no? When the prices in the wholesale were rising in these 15 years, okay?
Yeah.
This is an external issue. If you take out clearly the distribution component was reduced due to operation efficiency and technology, and the generation goes through the path that the government and the wholesale market decide, no? More carbon.
Sure. And in theory, that should happen in India as well, because it's usually a pass-through to a large extent, that whatever happens from a procurement perspective, if it's approved by the regulator, it's not upon the DISCOM, but yet at the political level, it is still viewed. So Sanjay, like the Delhi experience is a classic case where that may have come up, because now the way I'm perhaps oversimplifying, on one side, you've got efficiency improvement that is supposed to make things cheaper. On the other side, you've got two conflicting challenges. First is what Vermaji pointed out, they are sometimes run as a non-profit. You, Sanjay, had said that they run as a regulated, minimally profit. They're not a windfall profit sort of an entity. But then you've got another issue where you need huge capital investments, perhaps, and those capital investments may need a rate of return. So where do we see this playing out? Because the last point tying it together is we have to compare apples to apples. We cannot compare areas that are A, very different in consumer mix, or B, very different in service quality provision, whether it is load shedding or outages or hours of downtime, etc. So obviously the costs are higher. Mumbai has historically had the highest costs in India, if I remember correctly, but yet it had zero load shedding and people were okay with that sort of a dichotomy. So putting this together, which side of that scale do you see sort of happening faster?
Rahul, what private sector brings is a tremendous amount of efficiency and technology. And technology is basically the enabler to bring more efficiency. If we see case of Delhi, now the Delhi regulator fixed tariff at a loss level of 8%. If the losses would have been in the range of 25-30%, then the tariff would have been fixed at a rate of around 15-18%, whatever. So to that extent, the tariff would have been high. And even the government who was thinking of subsidy, the amount could have been so much high that they could not have provided that kind of subsidy. Our own experience is, since you bring improvement in reliability, number of MU which you sell is high. So even the capex has the impact of only its interest cost basically. So that is when it is distributed. If there is an improvement in reliability, reduction in losses, and then this capex, if it is distributed in the more MU, basically you don't find increase in tariff. Only increase in tariff is because of generation cost. We have seen it in Delhi. When the generation cost went up in 2009 to 2013, we kept the tariff at the same level and the regulatory assets went up to around 5,000, 6,000. After that, when the power purchase cost has gone down, there is no increase in regulatory tariff and no increase in tariff as such, if you see. So what efficiency which private sector brings in actually goes in reduction in tariff. So if we use it in a proper way, I think that's the advantage of privatization you have.
So then if some place has a AT&C loss already down to 15 or 12%, like Haryana has done very well, reducing by half in 3 years. There are places with 10 to 12% government DISCOMs, large. I'm ignoring cities or UTs. Then does that mean there's less money on the table? So now what I'm requesting is, let's have open discussion.
No,
if everyone could.
Rahul, I will just say one point, because you mentioned very sensitive point. See, anyone who is coming in utility business doesn't come to earn too much profit. He knows it's a relatively stable business if we engage with customer well, and he will get decent return on that. So if you see the Chandigarh, if you see it from business point of view, there is not much top line and bottom line. But if you see in terms of interest, you have 10 bidders. So even if we say in market players are not there, if the distribution sector is privatized, Chandigarh has virtually proved it's wrong. We have 10 players right now in Chandigarh. Chandigarh, the average every year capex would not be more than 100 crore, the kind of network they have. What the earning of private sector would be there? 30% means 30 crores. On top of that is a 16% means 5 crores profit every year. Do you think companies like us will be running for 5 crores profit in Chandigarh? It's a strategic decision that we have to be in this sector, and we know the return will be less. So it's a totally different approach when we think of utility sector. So I clearly agree with Mr. Arun Verma when he said the utility government sector is not making profit and just sustaining. I'm saying that is what the private sector also who are entering in utility sectors are doing that. The only issue is the way government support government DISCOMs. The moment they started supporting private DISCOM in that way, tariff will come down to further low. And who is going to get benefit of that? It's the customer who is going to get benefit of that. Customer is same, but we treat private distribution utility separately and government distribution utility separately when it comes to giving funds to government DISCOMs.
Thank you. That was one of the points
I
that
think
was there.
Sanjay has a very strong point. This is true. Our outlook of the say policymakers or the government or the regulator towards a private utility and towards a government utility are different, and they must be treated at par. Otherwise, you cannot have privatization of the DISCOMs. Same thing has happened in franchisees. I mean, the kind of deal that we do give to the private utility for franchisees. I mean, they will say that you will remove the AT&C loss reduction. You will do the AT&C loss reduction at the rocket speed, and you will give 80% to me, and this will be only for 5 years. Then coming again for 5 years. So this kind of raw deal is handed over to the privatization or the franchisee containers. Then certainly that is not going to help the sector.
Right. So I think this is a very valuable recommendation.
Can I also come in here, Rahul?
Yeah, just
Rahul,
one second.
Anurag.
Just 1 second, please. So now I would just request folks to, if they can all unmute their mics, assuming there's no feedback. Let's try it. So now let's have a more interactive session where we can also ask questions or clarifications of each other, because sometimes there are points, it's not just me being a gatekeeper, but really encouraging folks to sharpen the question, like what's the fundamental issue? Sorry, Anurag. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just saying it is quite interesting that you mentioned Haryana. You see, if you really look at the flagship scheme of Haryana to reduce losses, it was, I think, something like Mera Gaon, Jagmag Gaon, something like that. And the premise of that was the chief minister went and said that if you bring the losses down to a X level, then I'll be able to give you 24-hour electricity. Right. So essentially what it also shows, and actually that example will resonate in most places in India, that if you are able to tell the people that they can get better quality of power and uninterrupted power, if they pay, they would be willing to pay. The problem is that we want people to not, we don't want to give them a satisfaction of getting the electricity 24 hours, and still we say you have to pay. And that's when a lot of rural populace, etc., say we don't want to pay and we will not pay. So I think that's very, very important, that how we can improve the quality of service and then seek this in return, especially in areas where the electricity which we provide is not reliable. Right, this may not be true in places like Delhi. So I have seen Najafgarh, for example, where you anyways get 24-hour power supply. So over there, you don't have that leverage to tell the people that I will give you more power if you pay well. That you don't have the leverage in, say, Delhi. But in most of other parts of India, you have that leverage. And that's a shining example.
Rahul, Anurag has a very valid point, but let me tell you one caveat. You see, ex-minister or ex-manager goes to the people and says that I will do for you is not sufficient. What is sufficient, that you have to bring either in the structure of your working or say technology should be such, like 24/7, giving power 24/7 to consumer has improved the say viability of the utility in Gujarat. But that happens through the development of the technology, means feeder separation. It is not the call of a minister or CM that I will give you 24/7. They use the technology to do like that. Otherwise, what will happen, that initially the consumer will respond positively, and because there would not be a sufficient say technology to support it, that will again collapse. And I have seen it in many states, even in Haryana I have seen it.
No, sir, you are absolutely right, sir. Actually, see, there cannot be one magic bullet. There will have to be a number of things which will act as multipliers, force multipliers, right? But what I'm essentially saying is that when you look at improving AT&C losses, for example, and I'm again and again going there because that seems to me as the center point around which the entire discussion on DISCOMs revolves typically.
I will make this point. AT&C loss is not the only thing. I mean, this is
right. I agree.
Way of looking at the DISCOMs management.
I agree.
Forgive me, Mr. Manga, and all you, if you do not agree, because you are a much bigger manager than what I have been doing. Say, I am telling you different issues. AT&C losses there are two regions. One is the technical region. 40% of the domestic rural consumer in UP, we are not having meters. Now, how can you think that the AT&C loss will not increase?
Correct.
You go to the southern states and you do not have any meter.
So just to bring us back, sorry.
We are already discussing the same point.
Yeah.
If the 40% meters are not there, who was sacked for that? Has any person paid the penalty of that? It is whose responsibility to install a meter? I think we are not going into those things, and we are totally diverting the topic somewhere else. 40% customers get average billing. I have not seen a DISCOM where the average billing is in 1% or 1.5%. If the consumer not getting the right bill, how we should expect them to give us a pay bill? If we are not giving them 24/7 supply, how we can expect them to pay
Yes,
their
exactly.
Absolutely. Correct.
And whose
Correct.
responsibility is there? Is regulation is clearly saying DISCOM MD to perform, and Rahul said a very valid point. If he is for 3 years not able to reduce losses, why he is not sacked or even thrown out of service?
Correct.
There is absolutely lack of accountability and responsibility.
Yeah, that point is
Entire
very
ecosystem, let me say that entire ecosystem neither reward a performance nor punish a poor performance. In such scenario, we expect any sort of customer centricity. I think we are living in totally different world. We
So
all are human and we only work when there is either a reward or there is a punishment. We all belong to that category. If both things are absent, then we have to find some other model where these things are present. And that is why I was very strongly advocating please privatize. Government has no right to drain taxpayers' money in an unlimited way, which is going on
Yes.
every year on year, sir.
I think Sallav has made a small point about the involvement of the employee to
Yes, sir.
speak in the management.
Absolutely, sir.
That could be one of the good way. Also, where such kind of things.
So
Delhi's. Really.
So Delhi's experience was actually a tripartite agreement, if I remember correctly, where it was not just the government of Delhi, but it was also with the private entity and the employees involved with that process. So Shalabh, would you like to continue? I know you had more points that from your opening that you were not able to come to.
On that particular point, I couldn't emphasize more how much important it is to train, motivate, and reward employees, whether they are private or inherited from state DISCOM or state DISCOMs per se, without a change in management structure. But that's where Sanjay's point is pretty valid, that the policies, the employee HR policies, compensation policies are so restrictive in the government setup that if leadership is not assured of a tenure, and let me tell you, it's not just MD who gets transferred in one day. It's the lineman who does not get transferred for 20 years. Both of them are problematic. Probably the latter is more problematic. So employee engagement and reward punishment system, a carrot and stick policy is definitely inevitable in any organization, including a public utility. Why will that be an exception? You know, wo bhi to Kalyug ka hi part hai, wo bhi bahar se aayi hai. They will be here and they will need to be rewarded and penalized. Second point is around this whole normal profit versus windfall profit. I would want to relate it, Rahul, you know, borrowing your parlance, problematic DISCOM versus problematic territory versus lucrative territory. I think if there is a problematic territory with more than 30, 40, 50% losses, cantankerous consumers, trouble-making elements over there, that's where a private sector DISCOM should take the initiative and pick up the gauntlet and go for windfall profits. Earn your supernormal profits for first 5-10 years, and then plateau it out to a more perpetuity-based business over the remaining 10 to 15 years. But if you're looking at a more stable, moderate, long-term perpetuity, annuity kind of business, fair enough. There are Chandigarhs of India where you can make moderate improvements, improve the customer service, be in there for that sector for strategic reasons, and expand your own capacity. But it will not be a windfall gain. It will be a broadly regulated gain, not bad, but not supernormal either. Third, something like, you know, what Marcelo was mentioning, that unless you give me $1 for every dollar that I save, and $1 goes to tariff and $1 goes to investor, that model should work for problematic areas. Why should it not work for problematic areas? Delhi was a problematic area in 2002 when it got privatized. It was, you know, the losses in the 3 DISCOMs were upwards of 40 to 60%. And that's what stated, recorded losses. If I may say there were losses in excess of that, than what was recorded. Like Najafgarh, Anurag, you make a point that there is 24-hour supply in Najafgarh already. That's after 18 years of privatization. In 2002, that was not the case. So when in Haryana, if a certain minister goes and says, I'll give you 24/7 electricity today, maybe 20 years later, his successor will not be able to make that promise. He'll have to figure out certain other non-primitive, you know, more advanced parameters on which the utility could evolve. It could be around metering or customer service or net metering or virtual power points or prosumer-centric governance. But the starting point of everything is employees, workforce, manpower, the people who are running the DISCOMs have to be motivated, rewarded, trained, also penalized. I'm not saying that just handle them with the kids' gloves, but you cannot have only carrot, you cannot have only stick. You need both, and today we have neither, and that's where privatization comes in. That's the whole dilemma or irony of the situation. Rahul.
Thank you. So let's assume we do want, I liked your framing, Shalab. You've got, and I think Sanjay, you inspired it. You've got the Chandigarhs of the world. So once it's a predictable cash flow, it's a very finance oriented and it's a very well known, while the instruments needed in areas that have different challenges need political will, innovation, something very, unheard of, something new perhaps could be getting in local community buy-in, things like this. Different countries have done different things. Let's not talk about the Korean experience, what they did a couple of decades ago. I don't think democracy allows that to happen as easily. But now let's assume that we're in large agreement that we have to tweak the norms because different areas are slightly different. We can't have that one size fits all, but we still want to move ahead of where we are. I see UTs happening very relatively easily. I see one or two states that have been more open towards this, but I've also talked bottom up to states where people have said off the record, essentially over my dead body. And question is, what does it take to really incentivize? All of these changes are about coalitions. You talk about the energy transition. It's not that anyone says, I want carbon, I want pollution, but there are trade-offs. There are winners and losers for every shift. So how do we align them? What are the other hooks than just saying, I mean, obviously, if I had a world where we could guarantee that the tariffs reduce for everyone, for all sets of stakeholders, where the profits go up, where everything aligns very quickly, and yet the government still gets the credit and maintains patronage power and so many other things that they have, then we'd be doing it anyways. It's that fact that not everything happens at once simultaneously. How do we really change? Is it that we want to take a couple of states and try aggressively? Or is it that we gradually move this large heavy ship slowly turn it iteratively?
Rahul, there is one important point about the entire show. See, most of the utility in the union territories are running well. Be it Dadar Nagar Haveli, be it Daman, be it say other places or even Chandigarh. Compared to the other utilities which are not in good shape, they are in much better shape. But the issue is that who has started the entire reforms? The Government of India. So utilities, union territories are within the say administrative control of the Government of India, and we start from union territory. States, you see, the electricity being a concurrently subject, both have got the jurisdiction to manage. You have generation where the central government is also there. You have transmission where the central government is PGCL and managing everything. In the distribution, you do not have the central government. So it is the state government. So utilities, say union territories, utilities is not going to become the representative unless state governments are also on board for the privatization. And every utility has a different framework, different kind of composition. So states, I mean, it all depends. Privatization will be faster, privatization will be more effective, it will be more efficient, only if the state governments are on board. And as Mr. Banga has told, that the kind of support that the utility requires for its functioning from the government must be available to them. Because the political economy of electricity is such that it will come in way all the time.
Marcelo, when we talked about political will or even police support in India, I mean, you literally are talking of a law and order situation in a few niches. How did this play out in some of the countries where, I mean, I'm sure this is again the winners and losers, people who are enjoying, quote unquote, high losses.
I have a lot of things to share now. This is a very interesting discussion. I was expecting the question from you that what happened after 30 years, 25 years, where that companies were not well privatized, where still are under the government today. And we have the vision, and I can say you are in bankruptcy now. They're trying to privatize again now. We have a second wave in the last 2 years. and they are inefficient and without technology. Not only 30 years ago, only today is demonstrated that all these companies still are trying to survive. This is the first. The second, the policies. When you privatize, you make a lot of flexibilities. This is very important for the next, no, Chandigarh maybe, the next, no? You can do flexibility for the privatization. The government can say, this is our losses. I can give you 5 years. I can give you 8 years with flexibility to reach these targets in regulatory quality or in the losses or in the efficiency. Then they give us really air to transform and turn around the company to get the cash flow and to get the target. Then this is very, very important type of privatization. Put the KPIs not for tomorrow, put 5 year, 7-year plan, and let the company that are brave to do it. And we are doing it. We are going to do, other players are going to do. This is the first issue that you answer your question, no? The flexibility in the first year, and then you come to the normal period of the tariff review. The second issue about the tariff, you mentioned about the tariff will reduce. You have a spectacular country that grows a lot. When you grow a lot, you have economical scale, okay? In Europe, today we have no economic scale. The growth is very low, 1%, no? Because it's a mature market. Your country is a powerful growth market. Then the tariff in the economic scale, understood, no? In the economic scale issue, when you grow, the tariff does not grow. You need to maintain or reduce. So you can, the answer is you can invest a little in incentive and technology. With the growth, you are not going to see in the tariff. Huh? It's going to be compensated with the growth incredible of India. Then India is a spectacular model to achieve all this question. Technology, when it's possible, give us time, 5 to 10 years to everything, KPI, right to that, and that is the incentive, okay? I don't know if I answer your question, Rahul.
No, thank you very much. And I think this point about growth is a very key one that I think is missing from a lot of this conversation. In the last segment, I want to come back to now this other issue of both technology and exits, because open access is another instrument that I'm curious how people would say that it plays out, because at one hand you have growth, but I don't know if anybody has a number. What fraction of India's kilowatt hours are sold above 1 megawatt consumers? So this is not just HT, but bigger than the threshold of so-called HT. I have the numbers for HT. I don't know the 1 megawatt number, but it's clearly much larger than the people who are actually opting for open access today. So would that be a potential spoil sport to this sort of private sector? Or the other model is whether you create a national distribution company or you go for a more competitive route. You just say that, look, it's not that we're just going to take what used to be a public utility and make you a private utility. It's actually that we want more competition, if that's the end game, because that gives you a different set of efficiencies. Then how do we enable that? So maybe, would love to hear some thoughts of what are some complementary or add-on or multiplying factor models, or in some case negative, like open access. Love to hear some forward-looking thoughts.
Now, the industrial consumption in the country is something around 45 to 48% at present. Or even in some of the domestic consumers are also 1 megawatt, not 1 kilowatt. I think 1 megawatt, very few. So 1 megawatt, the open access is available only for 1 megawatt above load. So if you take the, say, 50% of the industry for that, I think something around 25% of the consumption of electricity in our country must be for consumers having 1 megawatt load or above.
But today's open access is trivial compared to that.
Yeah,
is my point. Is my larger point.
Much trivial. Because I told you, as long as the pricing policy in our country, as long as the power pricing policy in our country is based on the purchasing capacity and not on the say commercial principles, it will remain like this. Because you have a very good amount of poor consumers also, in the sense low-end consumers paying less amount. So either you eliminate the cross subsidy, go for a single subsidy, single tariff throughout the country for all kind of consumers, and whatever you want to give the relief to a category of consumer, give it through DBT, give it through other kind of compensation. and things like that, then it is possible. Otherwise, cross subsidy will be opposed by most of the utility. I'm sure whether it is private utility or the government utility.
So this DBT example is a very nice one about other things we should be thinking of. But question comes back to what Sanjay raised. Will the government treat a private coverage area different from a public coverage area? Because if states were tardy or negligent in paying the subsidy to the DISCOM, and now it is to go to a private DISCOM or this, how much would that be a factor? Jitendraji, any sort of thoughts on this sort of a?
I think that is the main thing when the Sanjay sir has indicated. I mean, what kind of support the state government is giving to a private distribution licensee had it been the government distribution licensee. I mean, there are support of subsidy, there are support of some other enforcement issues or some other things are there. But at the same time, if we have some kind of contract which has been taken care, I mean, as I've indicated, that the main stakeholder between this whole paradigm shift or whole ecosystem, which government thinks, generally state thinks, are the customers, political economy, like Verma sir have indicated, and the employees, which are the existing employees. But what they have, I mean, it is all the interests have been taken care while drafting the all clauses, all kind of SPDs, everything. But the one thing which everything is forgotten, that the main stakeholder, other stakeholder is also one of the incumbent company who is coming for running the show. And if those kind of support are not given in regards of subsidy, in regards of enforcing, in regards of field actions, then I think the whole thing will come into play.
So you mentioned SBDs, the standard bidding documents. Does anybody have any larger insights or that? Because one of the things was it left a few things hanging. It shall figure out, we will evolve a mechanism, etc. Second sort of observation was it explicitly avoided valuation or transfer of land. And land is one of the huge assets that a lot of utilities have. But if you're privatizing it, I remember from Delhi, one of the concerns throughout was how do we pay for huge amounts of land needed to improve the quality of supply, the new substations required, rights of way are tremendously difficult, etc. So just any last views on sort of where we are, because SBDs are a sort of definitive marker in this process.
I think section 131 of the Act, under which the asset transfer has been done to the utility by the government, I mean, that brings some kind of legal complication at present. It has again to go back to the state, then only it will be given to the private, or the DISCOM will sell off it to the private. So asset transfer needs more elucidation. The SBD is not very well developed on that. My sense is like that.
Anurag?
Rahul,
yeah, Sanjay, sorry.
If I add one dimension to your point, when I said at this point, country should go for privatization, why I said on this point, because we have doubt whether existing state government distribution utilities will be able to perform or not. And I think they will not able to perform. But what exactly we want a very performing distribution utilities, irrespective of it is government or it is private. Now, how we can do that? Where a regulator fix two different costs. He says that for this kind of working, this is the distribution cost which will be allowed to you. Unfortunately, we don't have those benchmark costs available, and we have not seen any I would say a regulative proactiveness on that for determining that distribution cost. Where we see in US and Europe, the regulator is forcing distribution utilities to deploy technology so that they become more transparent and the reliability improves. We don't find it there. But if we have a very clear-cut distribution cost which will be allowed to a distribution utility, AT&C losses which will be allowed as a part of tariff fixation and the trajectory of that. If a government utility is able to perform good, if not, there has to be competitive bidding, and who can perform should be invited.
Sanjay, this is exactly, sorry.
Land and other issues are very simple issue. Land in case of Delhi as well in case of Odisha has not been given to private utilities to use for any other purpose than to utilize for electrical assets. If we give some value, it will come as a part of tariff, and tariff will be high. So that's I think very standard. It has become in Chandigarh also, standard bidding document also. In Delhi it was same, and it was also in Odisha same. whether the token amount, it simply will pass on to distribution utility to manage assets. If distribution
Usufructory right is given, not the ownership.
Yeah.
Usufructory right is given, not the ownership.
Yeah, not the ownership.
So this is the crux of the matter, in the sense that, let's say there's a trajectory upon the DISCOM for AT&C. If a private entity beats it, there should be an incentive, whether it's 1:1, like Marcelo was saying, is
the government utility beats it, they should get the incentive.
Yes.
correct.
And
But
there
right
is-
now they're
No, but
almost
by the
all on
way,
the other side.
No, sorry, Rahul, but I think there already is, right? Because when they set up the tariffs, for example, I can talk about Delhi. I know Delhi quite well. When they look at the tariffs, they will say that, and I think Tata Power has been a beneficiary. Typically, when you say that, I will calculate losses, tariffs at a loss of 12%, and if you achieve 10%, correct, then in a way that additional 2% which you are able to remove, that in a way goes to your kitty.
50% goes to my kitty, 50% goes for tariff reduction.
Right. Yeah, it's 50% sharing.
It's a
Yes.
win-win for both.
Yes. No, I'm not questioning that. I'm just observing that on the other side of the scale, the government DISCOMs, when they fail to meet an AT&C, there is no penalty upon them.
No, correct. Absolutely. There is no penalty on them, which is not correct.
No, penalty is there. Rishabh, no penalty is there. The regulators have defined that we will not allow you, if the trajectory is predefined by the Government of India or their state government, whatever, then they say we will not allow you, permit you more losses than this. So the tariff is fixed considering that cutoff.
Correct. And then they get book losses. And then they essentially get carried.
Obviously, they run into losses. They run into losses, or they have to manage it differently. So, but then 2 points that I wanted to bring, which were missing. One is about what Salar has told. I mean, there can be some model where the employee has become a bigger stakeholder in the management of the utility. And because we have some experience where the performance related pay and all have been created, and in those utilities in the country, the employee has been given much better performance. So one is that, and the other is some of the utilities are overcrowded. They are still not say corporatized department and things like that. I mean, by no standard, it is an efficient organization, because where you need 2,000 people, there are 5,000 people working for that purpose. So these are some of another issue. The third, the regulatory mechanism we have touched, but there are certain mechanisms which are very artificial and must be removed, like truing up. What is this truing up? You are supposed to prefix the tariff, which will apply at least for a year. You can know about the economy which will happen over the year and things like that. Truing up does not work at all in the government utilities, because realizing the arrears after certain time is becoming very, very difficult. So this kind of reforms is also required in the regulatory mechanism.
Well, it works very well if you consider it a big rug under which to sweep things.
There are utilities who are not submitting ARR for 5 years.
For 5 years,
talk
yeah.
about true up itself. We have a regulatory system who doesn't even care for Supreme Court order. Supreme Court said that the Delhi regulatory asset should be liquidated in a defined period, has not been liquidated. This sector has been taken by anyone at its will. And this is why I am saying there needs to be a system where it can make a performance-based system. The government can make it, nothing like that. But if it doesn't, then give opportunity to others. I would also like to touch one more point. See, we are talking about different participation, whether the participation will be there or not, whether the foreign participation will be there or not. Have we tried? Not even a single privatization had taken place in 2 decades.
That's correct.
Absolutely.
Absolutely correct. This is exactly what I was also saying.
What we have tried is a subcontractorship in DF. DF is not a privatization.
Absolutely. That is not privatization.
No,
I think the one point is we're so scared of failure that we haven't even tried things that should or could or might succeed.
No, I have one question to Mr. Sanjay Manga. Just tell me honestly, what is the appetite? Can private sector help the country in managing even half of the utility of the country at present?
100% can be managed, but sir, give a chance.
That's
Give
the,
a chance.
I mean,
Give
that's
a
the thing
chance.
for me. I mean, my assessment of the entire thing is that it's
I'm
not like that.
telling you, sir, everything we talk about distribution utility is a myth.
Myth.
We say it is politically not acceptable. Sheila Dikshit won 2 elections after that. 2002 Delhi was privatized. Next election, next to next election, she won. It was not the privatization which has led
No,
to.
privatization will certainly not.
We say
That's
it is
not an issue
politically
at
not
all.
acceptable. It is politically acceptable. We say people don't want to pay. My experience with Delhi and now with Odisha say people love to pay. We say employees I find in Delhi were the biggest assets, and same experience I am having in Odisha. Executive engineers, down below engineers, everyone wants to work provided we provide him an ecosystem properly. They are the one who lived in constraints, so they know their job best. The only thing, we don't provide material on time. We don't provide good contractor to them. We don't monitor them properly, and the system is completely collapsed. If government can manage it, good. Otherwise, please hand over it to private sector. The way
No,
generation sector improved, transmission sector
that's
improved,
a
I'm
fair
very sure
way.
this will also
If I
improve.
can manage, it's fine. If I can't manage, I
So
must
I
send
think I would hope in closing, as we come to the final points, a number of audience questions have actually already been answered, which is good since we're already over time. But hopefully private sector is not viewed as the last resort. In some ways, it should actually be viewed as a very good option to be used. Obviously, the whole country will not happen at once. I think the next step, it's beyond our scope right now, we're out of time, but we should figure out the roadmap in the sense which states in what. So UTs was very easy. They were the sort of, to use Shalab's phrase, the Chandigarhs of the world, the steady streams, predictable, to use your other phrase, Sanjay. They're not a windfall sort of a state. But now we really need to tackle the more important, where the human impact can be so positive if we take bold steps. Bold step is not just privatization, it's also larger change upon governance, accountability, and so forth. So I think privatization is a very powerful tool in this portfolio that we should be adopting. It's not nobody thinks it's the panacea, but sometimes you go for the largest tool available when other things aren't working. With that, I will just request anyone with very burning closing thoughts that are missed or some things to keep for the next time. Open mic for 30 seconds or a minute to anyone who.
One quick comment here. I mean, when we are talking about privatization, I mean, if we don't want to go for the 100% privatization like few states are there, we should have some kind of service related privatization, service related activity, so as to improve efficiency within the organization or within the utility. At the end of the day, it will be the whole employees who will gain that efficiency, and then the things will look further better.
Thank you. Marcello, Anurag, Shalab, any of you with quick?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think I'll stay with my message, Anurag, this side. I think we should view privatization as a window to bring in additional investments, which will strengthen the sector. And I think the way country behaves, once you have the investments, I think people will make sure that other things fall in place so that these investments are taken care of.
Marcello?
Yes, very clear. The experience that I told you that 30 years ago and now are going again, the privatization wave in the world, not only in India, demonstrate more quality, more efficient tariff, more investment, and prepare for the future. Then I think you need to run. You as government, you need to run. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Shalab, quick last any thought?
I would just reiterate my point around Swiss challenge. I think wherever you have problematic discoms with equal challenges around people, assets, provident fund, public fund, etc., instead of sticking to a standard bid document, allow the private sector original proponent to come up with a proposition and let others counter it. And if there's nobody, then just award to one qualified bidder. I think Swiss challenge has been underutilized in our country.
Thank you. And that's true not just in the electricity sector, that's true elsewhere as well. So good observation. Thank you very much to all of you. Our chair has taken an important call, but I want to thank all, our chair, but also especially our participants. Marcello, you are in, which country are you in? I didn't ask. Europe, are you? Yeah.
Yes, my office is in Italy, and
Italy.
now I'm in, yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us from far away and from all over India. And we have a short video, I believe, that we'd like to share as part of the closing for this session. But thank you very much. And I hope these were recorded. We will share some of these wonderful recommendations and suggestions to the government and stakeholders. And the most heartening was, I think, Sanjay, your statement that industry is ready and we can make a difference and the appetite is there. So that was also a very positive statement.
Thank you, Rahul. And thanks again, everyone. Thanks all panelists.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tongia, for moderating that session. And I'd like to thank our chair very much as well. Thank you very much, sir, Dr. Verma. With that, ladies and gentlemen, like Dr. Tongia just said, we have a host utility video that we have to play, but I'd request all the speakers to stay with us for just 30 seconds because we need a group picture on the grid. Let's just look at the video and then we'll all smile and pose for a group picture.
Marcelo, if you're able to join also for a quick photograph.
Yes, please stay back for 30 minutes. Now,
30 seconds.
30 seconds, sorry, 30 seconds. Future Ready Sustainability by Tata Power Company Limited is the video that we're going to play. Tata Power Company Limited being our host utility. Let's take a look at this video. Very quickly, 30 seconds.
I have the power. We have the power